Field. I'm the natural resources, and we are recording. I'm the natural resources planner with NERPC. And I think for introductions, if we could just go ahead and have people start, rather than going around the room, just go ahead and go into the chat, please. And just introduce yourself in there. If you could all type your name and your affiliation, we would appreciate that. If you'd like to share any other contact info for people, you're welcome to do that, but at the least your name and affiliation. And I think we'll leave a few minutes for everyone to continue doing that. And while people are continuing to do that, let me go ahead and try to share at the top of our agenda for today. I just wanted to call your attention to our objectives for the meeting today. We're going to talk about just consent on the overall goal of this work group, which is to develop a framework for meeting science-based emissions targets for Northwest Indiana. We do want to share with you and receive some feedback from kind of our working team on our proposed methods and the work plan and some other kind of technical things that we'd really like your expertise and input on. And then we want to kind of start to engage and strategize in smaller groups based on areas of interest, building from the work and the input that we got last time around. So with that, I believe Kathy Sipple, unless there was any other housekeeping or welcome that you wanted to do, that I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself and kind of do a recap of our takeaways from the last meeting.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, just one final housekeeping issue. If you're calling in by phone, it would be really lovely for us to know who you are. So if you're able to tell us, we will rename you on screen so that you won't just show up as a phone number. So I see a 219-871-9896 right now. Are you able to unmute and tell us who you are? If not, that's okay. We'll work around it. But yeah, it's just good to know who we've got with us so we can include you. If you're able to do that later, just let us know. But yeah, as Jen said, what I'm going to start with is a quick recap. I'm not going to go through every visual that we did last time, but I'm going to just show my screen briefly to take you a walk down memory lane. If you were with us on May 5th, we really appreciate you being here. We had a lot of information that we shared, and we used a new methodology called Jamboard, which a lot of you adapted to very, very well. So we had a little thing about what brought everybody there, and then we broke out into groups, and it was noted that we had a lot of different people from different kinds of places that were dumping different kinds of information in a group. So based on your input, as Jen said, we're going to have opportunities to break out more by sector this time. So it's great to cross-pollinate and learn who's here, get to know each other, broadly. But then today we're going to go that next step and take your advice and put you kind of in cohorts. So with that in mind, Jen actually did a really nice job of compiling all the data from the Jamboards and putting it into a more readable, normal menu that we have here on screen. And largely the buckets that came up that seem to be of interest, you may disagree a little bit of where we put one piece or another. They don't have to live exactly as it is here. These groups will have the freedom to grow and be what they need to be. But basically, we saw a lot of interest in community and individual actions. Also messaging and engagement, maybe those all belong together, maybe not, but for right now, we're going to start there. Kind of like a cell does mitosis, you get more specific and granular as you get more people in and we can differentiate. Maybe that'll divide up into two groups eventually, but for today, right now, we're going to call that community and individual actions. We've got transportation. We had quite a lot of potential to move the needle on this climate action plan around transportation issues. We've got government and municipal. Obviously, that's where it all started with getting these greenhouse gases inventories done. And then we had just a little bit in agriculture, forestry, and natural areas. And I know we've got some people from local food council. We've got some farmers here. So hopefully we can get some real robust input from you. And then we traditionally have had some folks from like Victoria from Save the Dunes and we've had some movement, different environmental folks are in different groups, community, Jen used to be in. So all people involved in that kind of thing might fall into that category. And then just broadly planning and strategies. So those can be not a particular sector, but more how we do the things. So what I'd like you to do as we're going to listen to these great presentations from David and Kathy Luther is try to think about which lane would you like to pick for your second part of today's adventure. You can join more than one group. And again, we can add groups as we grow, but try to think which one appeals to you most today. So the second part of a meeting, you'll be invited to go into a smaller cohort. So just to review, it'll be community, individual actions, transportation, government and municipal, agriculture, forestry and natural areas, and then planning and strategies. I'll also remind you of that in chat when I'm not showing my screen anymore. But what I'm going to ask you to do is actually rename your name on screen. And thanks, phone person, for telling me who you are so I can help you. There's now an iPhone that's also joined. iPhone, I don't know who you are. So if you could message us in chat and let you know who you are, that would be great. And we'll help you rename yourself. But to rename yourself on Zoom, what you're going to want to do is go down to the participants area on your Zoom toolbar. And you should be able to see yourself among that list. You click on the more, there's like a little blue button that says more, and then a rename option comes up. If you can't do this, I will help you. Jen will help you. One of us will help you rename yourself. You just have to let us know in chat which group you have decided that you would like to join. And again, I'll put those names for you. And you can just put the first letter. If you want to join C, for instance, I'll be in the C group. So I'm going to call myself Community Kathy. You can just put C in your name and that would be fine. But later on, that will let us know very easily and quickly which group you want to be sent to. And it'll also give us an idea of how many we've got for each bucket. Okay. Let's see, how are we doing, Jen? Do we have Kathy and Dave ready to go? Or I don't have our agenda showing on my screen, but can you feed me what's next?
Sure. Yes, so I think we're going to go ahead and go right into what we're calling our plenary session, which is basically two things. We want to share some updates and progress with you on some of the technical work that the working team has been doing behind the scenes around our work plan for some of these technical aspects, some of the modeling that goes into this and forecasting. And we also wanted to have some participant discussion and feedback from you after the presentation. So if you could just hold your questions, until the end of this. We're going to have ample time at the end because we really want to get your feedback on how we're proposing to go about these things. So with that, Kathy and David, are you guys ready and able to share your slides and take it from there?
I'm needing screen sharing turned on
Okay.
myself.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I just realized it myself. Where is it? There it is. Is that the right one? Okay. Bear with me a second because a couple of my slides we already covered. People can see my presentation right now, correct?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So we talked about the agenda. I think the first thing we wanted to talk about was the overall goal of the project, and make sure, because this kind of came up at the very end last meeting, so I have put what NERPC's goal for this project is and what we're overall asking the work group and all of you invited to participate in, kind of to do a check-in on consent, that people who are here, this is their intention to contribute to this.
Kathy, would you like some help on this part?
Maybe yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Jen said she would put it on the slide, and I didn't have a slide for that. Yeah, so we did talk about last time that the first time a group comes together, we don't exactly know what is going to be our unifying purpose, right? We went in a lot of different directions, as I just reminded you of, but ultimately what, NERC has the bandwidth to do is what we've got on screen. So we realize people might come into this space and have, different things that they want to accomplish. But ultimately, if you're part of this group, we want to make sure that we're all meeting around a shared aim. And then when we have that opportunity to create those subgroups later, you can develop your own aim, but the aim will still need to support this main aim. So just to make sure that this is in fact involving everybody, we want to just get a sense for, is this okay with everyone? Is this what your correct understanding is of our shared aim? And it could be that we're missing a critical word here, or there's some way to tweak this to make it even better. So if you do consent, if you could, not everybody has their camera on, so we can't do a thumbs up necessarily, but you can do the emoji thumbs up, or if you can type in chat, I consent, or I agree that, this is a shared aim. So I'm seeing it from some. This might be a little tough for me to see. And what might be easier, just because there are a lot of you and I can't get a visual on all, it's nice to get an actual consent to put it in the affirmative. So we've taken action. But is anybody not clear on that aim? If we can either hear clarifying questions or any objections, you could raise your hand and we could try to address those. And realizing not everybody was on the last meeting, right? Okay, so we've got one question from Lori. And let's just take a look at that. She said, can we update language to say, it's scrolling quickly, to say around which communities can build their climate action plans? Kathy Luther, is that, we have kind of talked about that. Is that cool?
Yeah,
Okay.
around
So we
which.
don't end it with the word around. You
Yeah.
know me, I'm the grammar
Your
police.
grammar. I think
Sorry.
I actually.
I hear you. Yep.
I played around with that a little bit, and and it probably an earlier version was
All right, so I'm just taking a note.
Yeah, taking a note around which. Fix the grammar.
Good. Okay, and so Victoria has the question, great clarifying question. Is the strategy to do mitigation or adaptation or both? And Kathy, do you want to address that now, or do you think we'll talk about that more in our updates?
Yeah, so the larger part of the commitment is to plan for mitigation, but part of what I'm going to talk about later is the risk assessment and adaptation, where, how much effort do we want to focus on that? Is that something we take further into the future? And some beginning steps we can take.
Okay, wonderful. And I do realize, we came up with, I'm just going to touch on this for like a nanosecond, that we did address that there are some aspects of the greenhouse gas emission inventory that are not within the bandwidth of the current group that's convened. So if at some point in the future we convene a group that can address those, that is awesome, but that's not really what this group can do right now. So we just want to make sure that we have everybody here with the same idea of what we can do, with the idea that this could grow, this can change, we could flex as we become stronger and more differentiated. But it looks like everybody who's in the room, you're in the right place, and we appreciate you being here. So I'm going to declare that consented instead of proposed. Hearing no more objections. Okay, I'm going to turn it back to you, Kathy. Thanks for letting me help out with that part.
Thank you. And subject to the grammar change? Yes. Okay. Okay. So then just a review of where we left off last time on the emission inventory for 2017 for Northwest Indiana is 9.8 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent contributed across those sectors described, that being with an additional large chunk from industry that we're not going to focus on here, but we're going to keep in mind in case we come up with brilliant ideas there. And also there's some reductions that will happen there too that we can talk about later. But so, and that the science-based targets we have right now, wait, was that the next page? So that's where kind of we left off. If we take industry out as not being something that we have action, leverage to act on, that we're dealing with this 9.8 million metric tons, and it's about 13 tons per person per year in our region. And then here, what's the next slide? If we use the proposed science-based target methodology, we are working through the Environmental Resiliency Institute and the ICLEI organization. We would have a goal of by 2030 reducing our emissions by 63.4, which emission reduction in the world of climate change is also called mitigation. And it also can include sequestration, but so getting carbon out, reducing carbon is mitigation and our goal there would be to reduce it by 63.4%, which is from the 2017 number, which would mean getting it down from almost 13 tons a person to down closer to 5 tons per person. And reducing our absolute emissions to 2.4 million metric tons by 2030 from 9.8. So with that, and then this is the baseline forecast information that we have at NERC that we already have included in our current plans, comprehensive regional plans. I would note that overall this methodology, these numbers are based on at least the population numbers and the household and employment numbers, on taking a look back over 20 years and kind of just doing a linear forward progression. And then every time there's a new census, we kind of do a reality check and then start the line from there. So, and that these projections are not yet adjusted for the 2020 census because we haven't done the exercise at NERC yet. So we're going to have a little bit of a bump down and then go back up again.
Yeah.
And at that point, I'm now going to turn it over to David to talk about our business as usual emission forecast.
Great. Thank you so much, Kathy. And first of all, can everyone hear me okay? Am I coming through all right? Great. And Kathy, you can actually back up to the previous slide. I'll go ahead and start right there. So first of all, my name is David Clifford. I am a McKinney Climate Fellow from IU Bloomington. I'm an MPA student, and I'm going to be the Climate Fellow for NERC this summer. So I'm going to be helping out with this business as usual forecast and the Social Vulnerability Index, as well as the Climate Action Plan framework that we mentioned today. So I'm really, really excited to work with everyone. So I just wanted to, at the beginning, sort of state what we mean when we say business as usual, because there's going to be a lot of good questions and a lot of good ideas that are that'll percolate. But I just wanted to mention that the business as usual forecast that we do, and that that the program sort of calls for, is for on the books policies and changes. Right. And so these are things that are prior commitments and policies that are going to take effect and be in effect before the reduction strategies that municipalities and that the regional framework are going to come up with will take place. So these are things that we could, just from today until 2030, if nothing changes, this is what the emissions profile is going to look like. And so this is important because it gives us the basis for the climate action plan framework, as well as climate action plans that municipalities are going to be interested in conducting on their own. And so we'll get to see what emissions will most likely look like by 2030. And so we'll get into it here, and the slides sort of allude to it. So there are meaningful reductions that are going to take place in the region already. But in order to hit the goals that Kathy just mentioned a few minutes ago, we will need to take actions. There will need to be climate action plans and reduction plans in place to hit them. And so it's just important to remember that. And so we talked about, so we look at forecasting growth and looking at forecasting increases. The two biggest places well, three really places that's going to come from are the projections that NERC has that Kathy just outlined for population. Population is a pretty reliable indicator for energy consumption in a lot of different sectors. Employment was used and to split it up into different sectors, like employment projections for industrial and commercial sectors are reliable indicators for how much energy the commercial sector and industrial sector are going to use. And then there's annual vehicle miles traveled, which changes at about a little bit quicker rate than population and employment. But that's the basic projection of how much travel is going to be going on in the region. And so those are all projected to increase. But then there are also plans, and what we're going to get into all of this about ways that with the business as usual, we are going to experience some reductions. So the biggest one that I wanted to touch on that's mentioned here is that NIPSCO has published a resource plan that shows a pretty drastic reduction by 2030 in non-renewable energy. So they're going to be switching completely off of coal and substantially increasing solar and wind. We'll see that in just a second. And then vehicle emissions, the EPA keeps a lot of reliable data on vehicle emission standards that are going to be changing and how the United States vehicle fleet usually turns over with older cars going out, new cars coming in. And so we can project that cars are going to become more efficient as we go on. But Kathy, if you want to go to the next slide, I'll kind of get a little bit more into the NIPSCO regional plan. So this is taken directly from the integrated resource plan from NIPSCO. And I hope you can see here that there will be substantial decreases if you look at 2021 and you look at coal and natural gas with the red and the blue there. By 2030, you see solar takes a substantial increase up as well as wind. So this is really great, a really great injection of more efficiency. And so there is still some natural gas in the energy mix, but business as usual, NIPSCO's energy mix is going to become a lot more efficient. Kathy, you can head to the next slide as well. And so just to sort of show folks a bit more of the technical side of what we mean by the efficiencies being added to our projections to decrease emissions and then growth rates being added. This is ClearPath. This is the software program that we and our partner cities are using. And so what you'll see here, this is just an example from the ClearPath website, but taken from the greenhouse gas inventory that's already been done by NERC for the region, you'll see that there's a quantity and a corresponding emissions equivalent that each power source emits. And when you go to project out and project a forecast, you select the year that you're wanting to plan out until, and you select the growth rate that you think best exemplifies that source of energy. And if there is a carbon intensity factor, so for instance, here we have electric energy in this example, you would select the portfolio standard, but we have the NIPSCO energy mix to demonstrate that over time, the electricity is going to become more efficient. And so the one thing I wanted to kind of leave you with, you don't need to, we're not going to quiz you on that, but something I wanted to say was these projections use compound annual growth rates that are included in ClearPath's software. So we take the basic raw numbers of these projections that we have going out to 2030 and beyond. And we enter those into a specific calculator in ClearPath, and it's able to calculate on the annual level what that growth rate is per year. And so that's the main way that we're able to figure this forecast out with the data that Kathy mentioned a minute ago, and then using ClearPath software to sort of see to what year we're looking at. And so Kathy, you can head to the next slide here. So I wanted to show the what you're looking at here is a projection to 2030 of residential energy. And this includes the NIPSCO plan that I had mentioned a few minutes ago. So what you can see here, and I know the text might be kind of small, this blue line here, so the y-axis shows carbon emissions in metric tons. The x-axis shows years. The blue here, and you can see it going down pretty substantially, that's electricity, grid supplied electricity from NIPSCO. So based on all the information that we have access to, we see a pretty substantial decrease here from 2030 in the emission intensity of the electricity that's being supplied in Northwest Indiana, right? But you can, and we'll see in a minute what this would look like without that projection, and you would see it goes up with population without that energy mix. But you will see that this green section here is actually natural gas powering homes and heating homes. That is actually, so this is again, business as usual, no policies or efficiencies or updates to homes. Based on the population growth that we are seeing in this region, you would expect to see the natural gas rate of use in natural gas emissions increasing alongside population. So you see it ticking up slightly based on the data that NERC has available. And so Kathy, you can go to the next slide, and we can just see again, just to point this out here, y-axis metric tons of carbon emissions in millions of tons, x-axis years, and then here is just without any sort of updates or additions of renewable energy to the grid. You'll see that it tracks pretty directly with population. As population slowly increases, the amount of energy in the region slowly increases as well. So this is again residential energy, and this is without NIPSCO's resource plan to update their grid. So Kathy, we can go to the next slide here just to give them another. So this is another sector that we did a forecast for the region. And this is transportation. So again, you'll have chances to ask questions and get clarification if this is moving quickly, but you'll see that the y-axis here is a bit higher than the previous slides we were on. This is 10 million, the middle bar here is 10 million metric tons. The last slides were significantly lower than that. This is transportation projected. And so what you're seeing here is that because vehicle miles traveled is growing at a quicker rate than population, it is in fact also growing at a quicker rate that sort of outpaces any efficiency gains the US fleet is expecting from EPA efficiency in the vehicle fleet. The United States vehicle fleet turns over at about 5% a year. That's older, inefficient cars being scrapped, newer cars that are more efficient coming into the fleet. And so what you're seeing is, despite that churn of more efficient cars coming into the fleet, because vehicle miles traveled is growing at a very steady and consistent rate, you are seeing transportation and gasoline contributing pretty heavily to growing emissions in the region. I will also point out that diesel freight, so in both in the forms of locomotive train transportation and semi tractor trailers, are also contributing pretty substantially to transportation and mobile resources. But I did just want to point out here, that we are expecting, just based on the demographic information and the vehicle miles travel information, is going to see an increase. And so Kathy, you can head to the next slide if you'd like there.
I wanted to put a brief. Can I have a brief interruption?
Sure, absolutely, absolutely.
I want to put, and it's difficult to put different error bars around different estimations. But so, for example, the NIPSCO data on energy used right now is very, very high quality, direct from the source. The method to estimate the locomotive, the rail emissions is a lot more bootstrapped. Back of the envelope, we take a like a corporate number from, say, CSX, and we try to accurately represent it in Northwest Indiana based on the miles of rail track, which is a big extrapolation. So I just want to say, that's the best methodology that anyone has come up with yet for rail. So, but that means that think in terms of there's some uncertainty with all of these and some have more uncertainty than others. That's all. I
Thank
would
you,
say.
Kathy. And so just to sort of conclude, looking at, again, based on sort of our basic outlay of population and vehicle growth and and employment growth,
Mhm.
wanted to look at just very simply just to sort of compare the graph that Kathy mentioned at the start of where we need to get to with emissions by 2030 in the region. So you'll see, I want to point out the middle row here. So 2030 business as usual with the already projected energy mix and resource plan from NIPSCO. We're looking at a growth of about 4 metric tons per person from the 2017 level, right? And an absolute change, a pretty substantial absolute change in millions of metric tons as well. And so, you know, the energy grid changing does substantially reduce what the region would be emitting without those efficiency additions to the grid. It knocks off about 4 million metric tons. But we still have a good amount of work to do here. So really, I just wanted to sort of end this very brief overview of this section of our climate action plan, by underscoring that it'll be very important for municipalities as well as the region to have a very robust climate plan and climate action plan to take actions to meet our goals by 2030 and 2050. And just wanted to give a very brief overview into what we can expect based on the data we have for emissions in the region. But with that, Kathy, I'll throw it to you, Kathy Luther.
Okay, I wanted to make a note. So right now we're planning to, we're going to switch topics. Then we're going to break people up so they have an opportunity to discuss either a lot what David talked about or a lot what I'm going to talk about next. So I don't want you to think we're not going to have an opportunity for questions and interaction, but that we want to save it. If you have a lot of questions, I guess, I know we're on a tight timeline. Should we take a couple questions now or save it for the groups? I'm asking the facilitators here.
Can we see how we're doing once we complete this part?
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So then, so we're kind of going to switch gears, but so this is the forecast and the emission piece. Now I'm going to switch gears and talk about a little bit about the vulnerability of the region and the assessment, and different things to talk about because, right, that's a weight. We've just talked about how much our emissions going to grow, and this whole process is about reducing our carbon emissions, but we got to consider the offset of that as how much effort do we put into protecting ourselves from climate change. So the process for this is to identify the climate hazards that you're subject to in the future, and then identify where the exposure to those risks is, in both people, your built environment, and your ecosystems. And then between those two, where are you really susceptible to harm, both tangible and intangible, to your community assets, and then look at, and the social vulnerability part is the adaptive capacity. What capacity do you have to adapt to those hazards and that potential harm? So we've found some resources to do this sort of back of the envelope, and here's where we're at right now. So according to the Hoosier Resiliency Index, here are some of the two major climate hazards that our region will face are more high heat days and high heat nights and just extreme high heat events, and more extreme precipitation events, which then the corollary to the extreme precipitation events is more flooding. So, and the change, and this depends on which county you're in and whether you're at the north part or the south part, but in general, you know, right now we have maybe hot 8 high days of extreme high heat, maybe 5, maybe a little less day and nights with heat. Um, uh, and then the events 19 to 23. But if we have a medium emission scenario, we're going to be looking at 56 to 60 total high heat events. And if we are in a high emission scenario, 70 to 73. That's like, I just did them, that's 2 months of extremely high heat events if they were all consecutive. So, and those are health risks. We know from, I don't know, it was 20 years ago, Chicago had that huge heat event, and a lot of people, they actually had a lot of death from that, and other health issues related to that. And then the extreme precipitation events in a medium scenario will be 12 to 16 a year. In a high emission scenario would be 13 to 17 a year. So those are our 2 biggest hazards. And then in looking at our exposure to those hazards in a region, I found a lot of data on flooding, not as much on heat. But again, in the Hoosier Resiliency Index, they have a report that calculates how many acres of land you have in the floodplain. This happens to be Lake County. There was a malfunction in LaPorte County, so I couldn't give a cumulative region. I should have that shortly. But so in Lake County, you have 16,000, almost 17,000 acres of developed land in floodplain. And that is the 100 or the 500 year, 100 and 500 year floodplain, which is a substantial amount of developed area. And there's also, you know, and then in Porter County, it's different. In LaPorte County, it's different again, but I'm going to have regional totals. So that's a big brush way to look at it. There's another resource available that the NOAA Coastal Science Center has special flood hazard analysis for each of our 3 counties. And this is just an example of some of the data they provide. And this particular one on this slide is taken from LaPorte County. And oh, I have 2 graphics stacked on top of each other. But something like, it's hard to read, 7% of the population in LaPorte County is inside the floodplain, lives inside the floodplain. And that number is, they also provide that number for senior citizens, and they provide that number for people in poverty. They provide information about flood insurance, homes in the claims in the county, and dollar value of those claims. They provide information about the number of businesses in the floodplain, and community assets, schools, hospitals, police stations, etc. So we need to compile that from the 3 county reports and see what position we're at, of where our exposure is to this increased flood risk. Here's another one. And also one of the other interesting things I saw that they show is how much more development you're continuing to put in the floodplain. And for example, this one is from Porter County. From between 1996 and 2016, 15% of the new development was in the floodplain. So we haven't really, and 20% was outside. So we're still creating more exposure to risks that we know are going to increase. So that was the second part, the exposure kind of part and assets at risk. And then the third part is getting a little more into environmental justice, where we start to talk about the adaptive capacity. And an example was given. This is an example of 2 schools and the high heat. So you have high heat events, you have a lot more of them. A community that has well-funded schools with AC in every air conditioning in every classroom is less vulnerable to those high heat days. than another community where the schools are underfunded. Maybe there's a disadvantaged student population. They don't have air conditioning in the schools, or their air conditioning is broken. They may not have air conditioning at home. So that community has less adaptive capacity to address high heat risk in the future climate scenarios than the first community. So we have some tools. NERC has done some of this analysis ourselves on this social vulnerability, which is what contributes to the adaptive capacity a lot. And so here's an example. The Center for Disease Control has actually prepared social vulnerability index maps for each county. They're all standard. We have the capacity at NERC to do some additional analysis if we want to put a focus on that and weight things differently. But so they have the overall social vulnerability is a combination of socioeconomic status, household composition, age, demographics, and disability, racial, ethnicity, and language demographics, and housing type and transportation vulnerability. So, and they give you a snapshot of each county of where those, you can see where the different factors are greater or smaller. And they have, these are already prepared, but we could weight these differently for our region if we wanted to, or if we're missing data, or how much do we consider this in our, at the regional level for climate goals, or do we reserve this kind of emphasis for the local climate action planning? That's another kind of question. Is it our place at the regional level to address this, or do we put some boundaries and goals around it, or let each community decide? So here's an example of that same index map that for Porter County and for LaPorte County. Yeah. So those are the kind of two technical discussions we were going to have for the next 15 minutes. We thought we could break out, and if people have a lot of questions or ideas about the forecasting approach, or questions and ideas about this vulnerability assessment approach, that we would split into two to have those discussions. We're not going to lock anyone in a room if you want to hop back and forth. And now I will go to the facilitator to explain how to do that.
Thank you. I'm going to open the rooms, and it's really just one other room. If you stay here where we are now, that'll be the default, and you'll remain with Kathy Luther talking further about what she just covered. And we're really lucky to have Matthew Katz with us. He's been helping us out from ICLEI.
Oh.
So he and David will be talking about technology and modeling. So if you go to the breakout room, you can ask them more of your questions about the nuts and bolts of how we're doing this. So hopefully that makes sense. And as Kathy said, if you have questions for each, you can float back and forth. And we're going to be using Jamboard to capture your listenings, gathering your little wisdom nuggets. And then we'll have about 10 minutes to reconvene and just listen to what each group surfaced. And so we're going to be looking for, I'll just tell you, a scribe that can help out the leaders that I just mentioned, and also a spokesperson who might be willing to, give that overview. If it's the same people every time, that's okay, but we really want to do our work here with engaging people. So think if that's a way that you could contribute, and choose a room. I'm going to go ahead and open that right now. And again, if you stay here, you're going to be with Kathy, and we're going to be talking further about the vulnerability assessment and environmental justice. So choose the breakout room if you want technology and methodology. Hopefully that.
And Victoria has raised her hand.
Okay, Victoria, how can we help you?
I don't remember what the different rooms are called.
There's only one breakout room, and that's the technology and methodology. And if you stay here, this is with Kathy working on the vulnerability assessment and environmental justice. So
Okay.
you're welcome to stay here. You might be already in the right place, or you can just choose the breakout room. If you need help and you don't know how to get to the breakout room, private message me. Otherwise, I'm going to turn on mute and let Kathy start fielding questions.
Okay, I gotta switch to the Jamboard. And
Yeah, do you want me to bring that up for you, Kathy?
no, I got it. I just had to
got it?
stop sharing the other thing.
Okay. And do we have anybody who'd be willing to be her scribe? I can do that otherwise, but I'm doing all other kinds of little things. It just requires a moderate comfort level with Jamboard. If you don't recall, it's just typing up little post-it notes. And then if anybody be willing to be the spokesperson after we finish, that would be kind of cool too. Do you have it, Kath, or do you want me to grab it? You
Do
got
I
it.
have it? Woohoo!
Yes, you got it. Way to go. I'll let you take it from here unless you need me, Kathy.
Okay.
I'm here.
Okay.
You can help.
So the first part was if people have questions about that kind of hazard, and then exposure, and then vulnerability, impact, and then adaptation is kind of the 3 steps to doing the vulnerability assessment, or questions about using the kind of big national data sets we have from NOAA and the CDC versus doing more analysis in-house. I'll stop talking and listen to questions or concerns that people might have.
If you'd like, I could try to facilitate that process if people are shy about just speaking out. Does anybody want to like raise hand? You're sitting with a question. I know there were some questions happening in chat. Victoria?
Thank you. Sorry, I'm so chatty today. I'm curious still about how the forecasts are being made. And I think having more clarity on that will enable me to provide more meaningful input to the plan.
Am I wrong, Kathy, or would that be like a David question?
Yeah, that's in the other group. I mean, I can speak to it a little bit. Right now, we've just used the so there's some things we still need to dive into. So we are trying to identify like the best mechanism and the best data set to predict future freight and future industry. Like we have some workforce data that was used in the Ignite the Region plan that shows kind of what population of the workforce currently is in intermodal and what population of the workforce is currently in industry. And then we have some, national projections on where those jobs are going. So that's the basis to project, for example, changes in emissions from freight movement. We also did an e-commerce plan that looked at changes in travel patterns for shipping and things. So
I think
that's one example, right? Or
yeah, but I'm thinking about something kind of different. I'm more interested in how the population growth estimates, for example, are being made, if they're taking into account where we anticipate the population growing the most.
so
or is
that
it
is a challenge for us because the tool with our regional construct, which is why one of the questions I have is, so we are doing this regionally, and so we are using gross region numbers. So while the region population it may be declining or growing at a very small amount, people are moving around, right? They're moving out of, still moving. Some communities are still declining, some communities are growing. I think we did analysis, and Eman can jump in, but I think the population in unincorporated Porter County is bigger than any municipality in the region, right? So how that growth and where it happens does impact our climate footprint. We may have to develop our own approach to modeling that because it's not clear in the ICLEI software that how to do that.
And so just one quick follow-up in the goal for this effort, it's for communities to build their climate action plans around. And so am I correct in my understanding that there's this overarching framework that will then enable communities to individually create climate action plans, or there's one action plan for the region?
We anticipate the first description. So, and Victoria, you might remember, we've done this before with other, for example, for watershed management plans can be pretty complicated. We put together a regional framework. We assemble a lot of the technical data that is common throughout, emission rates per land use, things like that. And then we assemble targets, and then we hand that off in the watershed plans what they want to do on the landscape in their watershed. So yes, that is what we would envision that each community we're giving them all the base building blocks they need and all the base data, so they don't have to do a bunch of data collection. They just have to talk about their priorities.
I want to let you know you do have a question from David as well.
Okay.
Hey, Kathy.
Sorry, did I answer your question?
Very well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, David.
Okay, well, I wanted to ask for a clarification on how that analysis would be simplified or complicated by the fact that two of the largest areas of vulnerability and with environmental justice populations already have a plan put together. Would that be folded into or accepted from what you're doing here?
Yeah, we don't want to, let's see, I'm not doing a good job at talking and scribing at the same time. Communities with existing plans. I'm just going to put that so I remember what we talked about.
Kathy, don't worry about it because this will be recorded and I'll be happy to do it after the fact.
Okay. So I intend to use, for example, I know Gary has an action plan that they are implementing. My understanding is that Michigan City kind of left off at the emission inventory. So I believe the only active community action plan, climate action plan, is the city of Gary. And we would just absorb that into I don't want to, the city of Gary and those residents have already weighed in on that and made decisions that make sense for them. I think that our role in the regional framework is to support that, right? What can we do regionally to support Gary's implementation plan? As other communities adopt climate action plans, we can build things. Maybe that's a good section for us to add. How can we as the regional entity support the individual community's climate action plan? We were going to focus on how do we take that next step to encourage them to do them, create them, but once they do, how do we support them? I think that's a really good next step, or something to start building into this. How does the region support them? I do think the transportation section will be the most robust actual implementation plan, just because that's our wheelhouse, that we have some influence on.
We're already at time. I'm going to go check the other room and see if they have a lot of burning questions.
Okay.
This feels like it went too fast, but I'll be right back.
Thank you, Kathy.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I just had that in mind. I've got that in mind a lot, but yeah.
So, right. And I wanted to talk a little bit. So are there other questions that I could say? Because I'm thinking going back to the question of how do we address the internal population changes. And I always move my hands around and nobody can see that on this, so I don't know why I do. I think so. When we do the transportation plan, and if you weren't involved, we tried to imagine us what would be a trigger that would change our low regional growth rate overall. And a big one is climate change itself. If the Great Lakes region attracts drought, climate migrants, people who've moving from the south due to drought and wildfire, what happens if our population growth escalates? We already have emission growth with our utility investing hugely in renewable energy. Just our low tiny population growth is busting our budgets, right? So whatever, we're gonna eat their investment just in population growth alone. So what if we bust that? What if our population growth suddenly boom because of climate migrants? Then we need a high growth scenario. What do we do then? Then sustainable development and urban reinvestment is so much more important for the vehicle miles traveled, for the transportation. And where do we get our efficiencies in that scenario? And then where do we get our efficiencies and our carbon reduction if populations decline? If that doesn't happen, we can propose regional strategies, but some of those regional strategies can only be implemented at the local government level.
Well, I think along those same lines, the reason why that's interesting to me is because depending on where the population growth happens, the carbon sequestration balance will change. Right. And so if you're cutting down old growth forest, you're going to have a net flux of carbon to the atmosphere if populations are, for example, moving around Valparaiso, where there's lots of standing old forest. However, if you're converting potential, farmland into, residential developments, then what's that balance? Is that going to be, an increase or a neutral growth, or a potential decrease if it's high intensity agriculture? So that's kind of why I was getting at that.
Yeah, and a big target is the transportation vehicle miles traveled, which one of the strategies is to get people out of their cars, right? Either onto a nice shiny electric bus that Gary has invested in, or onto a bike, or into their sneakers. And so how do we how we develop also impacts that, because if the farther people are apart, the less efficient the transportation sector is. So
I think, Kathy, this is Iman.
Yeah.
When we think about growth, like we have to think about, there is a good growth, and which has like a positive impact somehow, for employment and, like have more jobs. But when is the growth is happening? If it's going in the unincorporated area, this is like undesirable growth. But like we could also, because we have a significant vacancy within the urban core area and around, the downtown area and urban area. So that's another thing, like if we continue to redevelop and revitalize this area, like to capture all of this growth, because we already have the infrastructure, we already have the utilities and these things. So this will be a good growth happening within this area. But and that's, I think we have to look at, like the negative impact of the growth and see, if the growth happened this way, this is not desirable, and show what's a good growth. So
and I think we've done that at NERC. I think that's probably what I'm leaning toward our role being at the regional level, is to lay that out. We need to lay out the carbon impact of business as usual sprawl development versus more consolidated growth. And we've done that in other sectors. We haven't really done it in this carbon emission way. So I think that will have to be one of our strategies. And then, we'll weight the different strategies on the cost and the benefits and the maybe degree of difficulty and likelihood of actually happening.
Kathy Luther, I just want to acknowledge, in case you didn't like see the participants, they've come out of the breakout room from the
Okay.
other one, so we are all back together. I'm just wondering, Jen, are you willing to maybe capture the summaries from both groups to see if there's, and we could maybe move to like page 5 of the Jamboard, or you could just use the existing Jamboard and add to it, whatever you see fit. Kathy, do you have something to finish typing up? We could go to the other
Yeah.
group first.
Well, these are really shortcuts.
Well, during the summary, that'll give another, time to listen to it and maybe make it a bit
Right.
more robust, with the capture being our
Okay.
main objective. So yeah, or do you want to go first? Either way is totally fine. You or David.
Why don't I go first? Because I think that our discussion leads heavily into theirs, the forecasting part.
Perfect.
So in our question, we talked about that the environmental justice community, or one of the more vulnerable communities, already has an existing climate action plan. And what is the relationship between community climate action and the regional plan, in which I thought that maybe we should focus on how do we as the regional council of governments, and how does our regional framework support local plans? And maybe that's a different focus than just what needs to be in the plans, but also what needs to be in the plans that NERC, and how can NERC support it, or regional actors support it. And that also leads into we had a discussion about where the growth is in our region versus where we're not having growth, and how that plays into this is me sort of adding, but our current growth pattern and business as usual, to the extent that it creates vulnerability and increases our carbon emissions because it's not energy efficient, it's a double whammy. So we need to build that into our strategies, but we also have to figure out how to build that into our forecast, the sprawl growth versus urban reinvestment growth. Does that capture? I think those are the main things that we had a chance to talk about, but it wasn't a lot of time.
So, good deal. Well, I can kind of speak to the forecast and modeling room. So I know that Lori Kegel had a great question asking about how electric vehicles and sort of the onboarding of those policies are being brought in. And before I even get into that, I do want to say, if you have any questions about the forecasting or anything else, please reach out to Kathy Luther, or I can put my email in the chat in this meeting, because I know it was a lot of information that we covered pretty quickly. But
I'm sorry, could whoever's sharing the screen with the Jamboard, could you go to a couple pages back so that you can see the
Oh,
yellow?
I can do that. Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead, David.
Sure. So back to Lori's question, she wanted to ask about where electric vehicles and alternative fuels factor into our transport projection. And so what we were talking about was, we were looking at gasoline fuel emission. So that was one thing that we were sort of limiting ourselves to in the forecast. We were also using just sort of basic national trend data in the greenhouse gas forecast. And so we were taking that data and that projection from the 2017 level. And so that didn't include EVs as much. But we wanted to try to input that into our system as much as possible, and sort of have folks collaborate with us on trying to project EVs coming into the system. That was my biggest question in the forecast as well. And then also just to say, EV adoption is likely going to be a very big part of the planning process that we undertake for the regional CAP plan. And so the business as usual, again, is just sort of looking at, as things stand today, if they were stood the same, what would they look like? What would things look like in 2030? And so, Kathy, did you want to add anything on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly what the whole kind of scenario planning approach would be. We would say, what do we get if we get, 75% EV adoption in passenger fleet? How much emission reduction does that get us out of the transportation sector? What about the commercial and diesel fleet? I mean, I think that's maybe that's changing even faster. A lot of the railroads have long-term sustainability plans to move away from diesel. So we could do a scenario and either do we say what kind of adoption rates do we need to get to our reduction target, or what kind of adoption rates of these technologies are likely foreseeable, and what gap does that leave us, right? That's two different approaches to that, but yeah, it's exactly what we do in our we do some, that's what we have to play around with. What is the scenario of actions that gets us where we want to go?
And then the other question that we wanted to try to address as best we could in the time we had was someone was asking about how our business as usual forecasts aligned with IPCC. IPCC forecasting for business as usual. And so we are using science-based targets as part of the One Planet City Challenge method, which is a practice that a lot of cities and counties around the Indiana area joining the climate action plans are using. And so the science-based targets are more or less in line with IPCC, but we were wanting to see if people had more questions about what we're doing and how it aligns with IPCC, please let us know. But we're sort of operating, thinking about how the science-based targets that we're aiming for in ClearPath are more or less in line with trying to meet global reduction targets. So I don't know if any of that made sense either, but so yeah, that was what we had. But again, please reach out if you guys have any more questions. I feel like that was a lot of information that we covered today. But yeah, Kathy Sipple, I'll throw back to you if we want to move on.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for that. That was fast, but we do have a lot to cover today. Again, the big thing that we wanted to do for the second half of our time together is allow people to, again, choose your own adventure, go into a sector a little bit deeper where you can talk to your peeps and go not just with, what we've been doing, but what is it that you want to do? What do you want to go further with that you came up with last time? So I know some of you have named yourself, which was really helpful. I'm just going to go ahead and open the rooms, which I have in fact named because not everybody kind of got around to that step. So there's just a reminder again, there's agriculture and natural spaces. That'll be in one breakout room. There's planning and strategy, and agriculture and natural space, that'll be with Jen Birchfield. Planning and strategy, that's going to be with David, who you just heard from. And then Kathy Luther is going to head up transportation. We're combining that with government and municipalities. And then I'll be here in the main room, and I'll be helping out with the community in individual action steps. So I'm going to go ahead and open all rooms, find your spot. And I am going to ask that for this one, you don't bounce around a lot. You can join other meetings. You don't have to be on this track forevermore, but for the duration of our meeting, it's not that long. It would be helpful to just do this. So a few things that we would like for you to do during this meeting, and I will put this in chat too as a reminder, is we're not meeting in July as a group. Our next big group meeting will be in August. And so what we'd really love is if there's enough energy around it, or perhaps you can think of some people who would like this topic, but they're not available Thursdays at 1, or you just like to go deeper on this topic. I would love to help you facilitate a meeting in July. And so if your group has enough momentum and interest around it, see if you can not only maybe appoint a leader who I could have as a point of contact to figure out when that July meeting will be, but if for extra bonus points you want to go ahead and pick a date and time, that would be fantastic. You're going to have your own individual Jamboard, which David, Kathy, Jen, and I will share with you. And on the first page, you're going to just kind of introduce yourselves again. You could go a little deeper this time since you're already among sector people that want to know more about you and why you're there. And then on the second one, the second page, there's little Post-its from the first time Jamboards that we thought were most related to your sector. That's not comprehensive by any means. It's just a jumping off point. So feel free to add to that. And it's kind of a loose thing, but we want to know basically the why, who is there. If you can reflect further on the input, add to it, and then let us know if you're willing to be part of a follow-up meeting during our off time and appoint a leader. I know that's a lot, but we're going to come back to this room. Remind me, Jen, how much time are we going to allow at the end? I think we
Let me see if I can.
was it like 20 minutes? I think we would like to just report out how did that meeting go, and again, just do a real cursory summary. It's not meant to be a comprehensive meeting on this time, just enough to kind of find your peeps and get to know each other. Well, I'll close out the breakout room again, but I'll also be facilitating, so I might be multitasking.
Kathy, I show your agenda going until 2:50 with the breakout sessions, I believe.
Okay, I'm kind of thinking we should maybe even end a little sooner to have enough time for closing out, but we'll play it a little loose and see how things are going. Group leaders, you can message me if you're kind of done early or if you need more time, maybe just weigh in, let me know, and we'll kind of take it from there. But we'll aim to leave at least 10 minutes, possibly as much as 20 minutes at the end. Does that sound okay? I'm going to go ahead and open the breakout rooms. If you need help getting into a room, just let me know. And again, stay here if you want to talk about community and individual actions. And also we're going to talk about just overall messaging. That was something that came up. That one might really need its own group, honestly, but we'll make space for that in the main room here. Let's see, I'm seeing some people that labeled themselves. I'll help you if you need help. Rachel, you said planning and community. Yeah, do you want to stay here, Rachel, or you're going to go? Okay, great. Let's see.